Welcome to another episode of the Battlefields Bourbon podcast, the podcast where we sit and sip, talk all things Civil War history and bourbon and whiskey. I'm Jack, joined as always by my co-host Elijah. We are coming to you from the historic Bell House in beautiful downtown Winchester, Virginia. The Bell House is preserved and maintained by the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields Foundation, managing entity of the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields National Historic District, the official sponsor of the Battlefields Bourbon podcast. If you like what you hear and you want to support the podcast, consider becoming a member of the foundation. Every dollar given towards battlefield preservation in turn helps support the Battlefield Bourbon podcast. We've got an exciting episode today, but before we get started into our topic, Elijah, let's get our glasses full. Tell the listeners what we are sipping on.
It is Elijah Craig Toasted Barrel from Heaven Hill Distillery. If you're familiar with their flagship product, just Elijah Craig Small Batch Bourbon, that is this. It's the same proof, I would imagine the same age. It's just finished in a toasted barrel. So what that means is that the barrel is, it's not charred the way that normal bourbon barrels are charred on the inside. It doesn't get to that point. They're just heated to the point where the interior is toasted. And then it gives it a little bit of a different flavor profile, which you'll see here if you've had any other toasted products. It gives it more of a sweet, but also a little bit of a spiciness to it as well. The mash bill on this one is 78% corn, 10% rye, and 12% malted barley. Like I said before, it is 94 proof, same thing as their flagship Elijah Craig Small Batch. We can give it a little... That was good?
Pretty good.
That was good. But they also do barrel proof bourbon. They've got rye whiskey as well. Toasted barrel. I think they're coming out with a toasted barrel proof rye as well as, toasted barrel proof bourbon. And then I think they are also doing a barrel proof rye. If not, they need to. There's too many new releases here lately to keep track of everything that's going on in the whiskey world. But
so instead of like a charred barrel, this is just getting a light toast.
So it is aged primarily in that charred barrel.
Okay,
for
but
whatever.
It's finished.
Yeah, but then they finish it for a handful of months or maybe even a couple years. I'm not sure because they don't state. But it is finished in toasted barrels, which gives it a little... It's almost like double oaking. I mean, you are putting it in a separate barrel.
Yeah.
But it's
so it's already bourbon, but they're and it's their standard bourbon pretty much.
Yeah.
They're going to go ahead and throw it in a toasted barrel.
Yeah, so think of it like your port barrel finished bourbons. You're putting it in another barrel, except it's not a port barrel. It's just another white oak barrel. Yeah. It's just charred or toasted, not charred. Toasted. But this one always smells really good. I've had this before, and I always really enjoy it.
Never had it, so this is exciting.
Yeah. Good first time sip. It's like a nice, like Coca-Cola almost, if you get that one. It smells and tastes kind of like a soda, but yeah, you'll kind of get
maybe
that
like a
spiciness.
A cola that you let the ice melt and it got watered down. Yeah, caramely.
Definitely on the palate. It is very much like a soda or like one of those like soda candies. If you know what I'm talking about, I get that out of it a lot, which is a fun little flavor profile there.
That's good. It's different.
Yeah, no, I mean, you can definitely tell a difference from their small batch bourbon. MSRP on this one's about $55 if you can find it. I know in Virginia it's no longer allocated, so it's easy to get here.
It's just out.
Yeah.
Just out and about.
Yeah. I know some other places you'll probably see it for a price gouge. Don't entertain that. I've said it before. I've said it since day one. Don't entertain the price gouging. But yeah, it's no longer allocated here, so we can kind of get it as we please.
I think my fiance got this for me. She'll remind me if I don't remember, but I think she got this for me, which I'm excited about. This is good.
Yeah, the last bottle I had of this didn't last very long, if that tells you anything about how good it is. And of course, something like that you always want to share with your friends.
This is really good.
Yeah. It's like, here, try this. You're going to like this one. And in turn, it doesn't.
I get that. For me, when I first tasted Elijah Craig, and then ever since I've had it, always get those notes of like almost like a sour apple candy to me.
Yeah.
And I get a little bit of that coming through their, flagship Elijah Craig, kind of the notes you get from that. But no, this is a refreshing spin on it. And definitely pick up a bottle of this because this is really good, really refreshing. And I think it's cool a little bit in this here in the studio, so the bottle's been a little chilled, it feels like.
Yeah, it's like slightly less than room temp, so you get a little more punch from it.
Which is nice, because you can get more flavor, I think, out of it sometimes, too, without having to water it down.
Yeah. No, because like I feel like when you get to a point where if you stick a bottle in the freezer or in the fridge, when it gets too cold, I feel like it doesn't stand up as well as it should. But if it's like room temp or slightly less than that, to where it's not necessarily chilled, I feel like that's like ideal. Because then if it gets too warm, then it just kind of, everything just kind of blends together and you can't really pick things out of that. But this is perfect temp for sipping.
This is like a nice summer. This is perfect for a day like today in July.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because I've actually heard that Toasted Barrel is a good wintertime sipper.
See, I think that's a mind game that people are playing with you because they're like, oh, toasted, you should enjoy this by a fire.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, no.
I'd sip this year round, yeah.
Yeah, this is great. Good for them. This has been sitting on the shelf for a while, so I'm glad we got to pull it out for this episode.
Took us long enough.
I know. We've got a lot we got to do.
Yeah, too many.
I know. Well, we've got a good pour in our glass, and let's get started with our topic. This is, I think, a special topic for me, especially, and with today, the day we are recording this, it is the 163rd anniversary. So the day this is released, it's not, but the day we are recording it, if that means anything to you, 163 years ago today, our topic takes place. And this is the Battle of Hokes Run, July 2nd, 1861, also known as...
Early.
Yeah, very early. Pre-Manassas early. Only a couple of other battles take place before this. This will be like the third to take place in Virginia by that point. So it's cool. It's also known as the Battle of Falling Waters, not to be confused with the
Battle of Falling Waters.
The Battle of Falling Waters. The July 1863 battle, the post-Gettysburg Battle of Falling Waters, that'll mainly take place on the Maryland side of the Potomac. But the namesake Falling Waters comes from the hamlet that sits along the Valley Pike in Berkeley County, today West Virginia, at the time Virginia. And it's also known as the Battle of Haynesville because of another hamlet just south of where this main battle will take place. I like calling it the Battle of Hokes Run, though. That's what it's known as by some historians. That's how the National Park Service refers to it in their great database of, battlefield studies. And it does. You can't confuse it with anything else. There's no other battle called Hokes Run for now. So, like I said, 163 years ago at the recording of this episode, this tiny but mighty battle will take place. And to set the scene, we'll be in Berkeley County, like I said, today, West Virginia. But back then, this was the very, very top of the Shenandoah Valley, the very lower end, the northern end of the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. The demographic of this area, you've got a good bit of industry here, specifically with Martinsburg having the railroad, being directly west of Harper's Ferry and across the river from some other major towns in Maryland, as well as the C&O Canal being directly across the Potomac from the Virginia side. Berkeley County's not the largest county in the valley at the time, but it's prominent because of its location to other states to the north. The population of the largest town there is Martinsburg, and that population consists of a handful of Unionists. A good bit of them, definitely more than Winchester has at the time of the Civil War. That's sort of a trend I've noticed when studying these towns and cities throughout the Shenandoah Valley. As you work your way from south to north, you start to obviously find more, loyal Unionist sentiment amongst the citizens there. But this battle, to set us up, we're in July. This is early July of 1861. To set the scene, who are our team players, who are our coaches per se for this engagement? You'll have Robert Patterson in command of the Department of Pennsylvania, which eventually gets broken down. Specifically, Patterson refers to his army as the Army of the Shenandoah. At this the Shenandoah Valley at this point, but it's the Department of Pennsylvania. And he's got a force anywhere between, some accounts will say 10,000 to 14,000 men, and they're mostly situated leading up to this battle on the northern side of the Potomac River in Maryland. On the southern side, you'll have Joseph E. Johnston, who's in command of this Army of the Shenandoah, and he's headquartered mainly out of Winchester, but they've jumped back and forth through various parts from Harper's Ferry, back down to Winchester, up to Martinsburg. They're moving around a good bit. They're fortifying the town of Winchester. This is when you'll see the construction of forts like Fort Collier, Fort Jackson, and Fort Alabama. So you'll see this come into play, and those earthworks become constructed during this period. So this is in May to June of 1861. Patterson's force is growing. The Federals are growing, and there's a bunch of names that just jump out to anybody that knows the Civil War. You've got Dan Butterfield, whose claim to fame is, for bugle calls and writing or rewrote the version of what we know today as taps. So this is Dan Butterfield. Mentioned for a split second in the movie Gettysburg. He's here. You've got Lew Wallace. He's here. He's an author. He'll author Ben-Hur, a famous novel, and he's under Robertson's command. You've just got a bunch of notable names. Who's another one I'm trying to think of? Dixon Miles, Alpheus Williams, George Thomas, Abner Doubleday.
I think Thomas might be one of the biggest Union names there.
So, the Rock of Chickamauga. So you've got a lot of prominent names here, a lot of green troops, obviously. These are three-month regiments that have been formed in various states consisting of like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Connecticut's here, New York. You've got a combination of militia troops as well as just regular United States military that have been pulled from other military bases and form up this command.
It's crazy that they've been able to assemble so many troops so early in the war. I mean, this thing's brand new. Yeah.
So, when Lincoln calls for those volunteers, there's definitely an answer across the North. Patterson's he's like 69 years old by 1861. And he's of Mexican War fame. He serves during that, and the Civil War comes around, and he's like, well, it's go time again. Let's relive the glory days, and that obviously will not last long. So he's in command of this department of Pennsylvania, and like I said, going back to the Confederates, Joseph E. Johnston. So we have the 1st Brigade, which will later be known to make up what we know as the Army of the Shenandoah, and then portions of that will go to become what we know as the Stonewall Brigade after 1st Manassas. So Jackson, Colonel Thomas J. Jackson, not yet Stonewall, by this point in the war, has the 2nd, 4th, and 5th Virginia, as well as the Rockbridge Artillery, and then the 1st Virginia Cavalry under the command of Jeb Stuart. So this is kind of setting the stage for what's happening and who are our key players here in this battle.
It's interesting to think that Jeb Stuart and Jackson are both here so early on in the war, and they're participating in roles that, it's before their rise to fame. And it's just it's like their rookie year almost. Yeah,
Stuart's a lieutenant colonel, and Jackson's a colonel at this point. They don't have higher ranks beyond that yet. So on July 2nd, 1861, Patterson originally has a plan to cross. He wants to split his department into two, and one of them crossing the area of Williamsport across the Potomac on the Valley Pike, using the Valley Pike, and then another crossing at Dam Number 4, which is just east of Haynesville, where the Confederates are camped at this point. The Confederates are camped at an area, a couple miles north of Martinsburg, and this is Jackson's force. They're here. They've been here for a couple weeks. It's known as Camp Stevens, named after Alexander Stephens, the Confederate vice president. And matter of fact, after this battle, the Federals and Confederates continue to use this as a campsite throughout the course of the war, and both sides refer to it as Camp Stevens. The Federals seem to never change the name of it as they use it throughout the war.
I've also seen the written accounts of it being spelled differently too.
Yeah.
Like people have given it the V or the PH, but I mean,
Yeah.
same name, just different spellings.
Nobody could spell back then, I think.
Yeah, I think everybody was illiterate.
Yeah. Well, Patterson wants to cross at dam number 4, which is, if crossed there, it would put portions of Patterson's command basically behind or to the far right of the Confederate line. And then you'd have his another part of his force crossing at Williamsport. And that's a smart idea. Well, the terrain and logistics of it all, as well as the water levels and how steep the banks are on each side, like I said, terrain at dam number 4 just doesn't seem to be a viable option for Patterson's force. So he'll end up on July 2nd just moving all of his force across the Potomac River from Williamsport. And they're not, and this is, they'll break camp around 2 a.m. and they'll get to the fords around 4 or 5 o'clock and begin crossing. They're not untested when they reach the other side of the Potomac. Jeb Stuart has that 1st Virginia Cavalry stretched out along a 50 mile front along the Potomac, guarding various crossing points. So they know, and that's what I found fascinating when researching this, is like the Potomac River was the divider between the United States of America and this newly created Confederate States of America.
Mm-hmm.
And everything relied upon what happened between these two sides. Who crossed. Specifically at the Williamsport crossing, it's more than likely determined that it was Company B of the 1st Virginia Cavalry that would have been positioned and reconnaissance at the Williamsport crossing. Company B consists of troops from Berkeley County, so I always thought that was interesting.
Yeah,
these are
defending
men
their home turf,
and probably positioned there because they know the area the best. So they're going to be positioned there at the Williamsport crossing. Mm-hmm. As Patterson's men begin to cross in the early morning of July 2nd, and as they're marching to this point, they'll notice a comet in the sky. This comet is known in history now as the Comet of 1861. And this will be seen by both sides. Both Confederate and Federals will see this comet. There's a quote here from Clem Fishburne of the Rockbridge Artillery will write, "Did any of you see the comet last night? I saw it when returning from headquarters after writing this letter. It was the brightest I ever saw, with a tail extending perhaps 40 or 50 degrees." So that was actually Pendleton. Clem Fishburne will write, so Pendleton in command of the Rockbridge Artillery, Clem Fishburne will write, "The weather was clear, and besides that, the light of all visible stars, we enjoyed one of the most brilliant comets which had appeared for many years. It appeared about midnight to be just above us, and many hearts were halfway cheered by interpretations which were put in appearance. The tail extended northward or southward, I don't remember which, but it meant that we were to be victorious in the battle which we then thought was imminent." So both sides will draw meaning. The Federals will have their own accounts. They see this comet in the sky as good luck. It almost shows the innocence of the army at this point. But by both sides, these mostly green troops, I feel like the only troops in these battles that had prior experience are now the ones leading these men, with Mexican War experience. Right. So they'll see this comet as they're crossing. But as Patterson's men begin to cross, like these are fresh green troops, this will be the first full forced crossing of the Potomac. There's been probes before trying to cross at various points, but not as the entire Department of Pennsylvania or all of Patterson's command. Mm-hmm. So this will be, and this is kind of interesting, the first invasion into the Shenandoah Valley, happening in the morning of July 2nd. Well, it's not as, hardcore as it seems to be. The Patterson's men before crossing will kind of stall by removing their boots and their pants and their socks, not wanting to get wet. And it's cool to just think, fast forward 3 years and men are just marching across rivers, no problem with everything still on them.
Right.
But this will delay This will delay Patterson's men in crossing. Each regiment, each company beginning to do this. You eventually get troops across. Stuart's men are going to kind of, stall with however they can. But at that point, it gives Stuart a little bit of time to return to Jackson and report back to Jackson saying the Federals are coming. And this will give them time to set up. And as the Federals are beginning to move slowly up the Valley Pike towards south, towards Martinsburg, they'll come in contact more and more with Stuart's men. And by this point, arriving to the field in the area just south of Falling Waters, that hamlet about less than 2 miles to the south of it, and about maybe 2 or same amount of distance between Falling Waters is Haynesville, and in between these areas is what's going to become the battlefield. Mm-hmm. It's a crossroads, not really a crossroads. It's a point where a road comes in and tees with the Valley Pike, known as the Hammond's Mill Road. This will tee with the Valley Pike. Today it's a major intersection and an exit off the interstate. And this is where the Confederates will come. Specifically, Jackson will send the 5th Virginia to this road, to this rise on the Valley Turnpike. And then he'll also have elements of the 1st Virginia Cavalry under Stuart in his pocket as well. And first he'll send out the 5th Virginia to begin marching from their camps at Camp Stephen north to this area I just described. And Jackson will converse with Pendleton and ultimately decide to just send one cannon forward, leaving the 3 other guns within the Rockbridge artillery behind. And if anyone is a student of the Civil War, you might be familiar with the Rockbridge artillery and the names of those guns, the apostles as they're often referred to, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I just learned this recently. 2 of those, everyone thinks it's all 4, but 2 of those guns are actually the ones from VMI used in the Rockbridge artillery. Everyone thinks it's all 4 that stand at the Institute today are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John used by the Rockbridge artillery, and that's not the case.
Wow, I didn't even know that.
I learned that. 2 of them are. Supposedly not Luke, I can determine from my research. But 2 guns are pulled from the Institute, leaving 2 behind. Pendleton will secure 2 more guns from Richmond, then be brought up to join and make that full section for them of the Rockbridge artillery. And at the Battle of Hokes Run, they'll have those 2 VMI guns. The decision's made to bring up one of the non-VMI guns because the cannon tubes themselves on the VMI guns weigh like 300 pounds less than the tubes on the standard cannons. They're smaller pieces. They weigh less because they're easier to use for the cadets. But the men in the Rockbridge artillery are a little hesitant to use them in battle, and that's because the recoil that comes off of a smaller gun firing the same projectile, the same amount of powder, will shoot that gun back further.
That thing back very
exactly.
Far, yeah.
And if you're cutting weight out of a barrel, well, you don't have like a pocket to take change out of. You got to make the barrel thinner, smaller, use less material to make it weigh less. Mm-hmm. So they were also, there's the fear of exploding barrels too.
Which was a common thing.
It never happened to those VMI guns throughout the course of the war. So, but it's decided to bring the non-VMI gun up, leaving the other 3 in reserve. And supposedly that is Luke, which is a 6-pound, smooth bore gun. Mm-hmm. And that'll be brought right into the center of the Valley Pike, right where the Hammond's Mill Road meets the Valley Turnpike, facing due north, the direction Patterson's Federals are coming. Once the Confederates arrive to the battlefield, the 5th Virginia specifically, the regiment that'll be here, it's so interesting to follow battles like this very early on in the war, because when you look at maps and you read the accounts, and when it's small forces engaged, you're breaking troop movements in location up by company at this point. Now, fast forward a couple years, we're looking at Gettysburg and battles in 1964, and you're breaking it up by like brigade or division almost.
Right.
And at this battle, we're going to break it down by company. So along the Hammond's Mill Road, which runs west to east practically into the Valley Pike, On the far left, on the far west flank of the Confederates, you'll have F Company, then I Company, then K Company, and K Company being the Morgan Continental Guards, wearing their lovely Rev War colonial uniforms at this point, and they'll be right there at the apex of the Hammond's Mill Road in the Valley Turnpike. On the far right side, off to the eastern side of the Valley Turnpike in some open ground, you'll have on the far right E Company, B Company, and L Company. And then right in the middle along the Valley Pike, filling the gap, but in an advanced position north of the right and left flanks, built up into farm housing of the Porterfield Farm and the Porterfield Farmhouse, you'll have C Company on the left, D Company straddling the pike, and H Company on the right. But we'll get a little bit to what they're engaged with once they arrive there. But as this is all happening and the Federals are approaching from the north to the south, you'll begin to see some light skirmishing and engagement there. But we have to talk about Stuart for a moment. Jeb Stuart and the elements of the 1st Virginia Cavalry will be sent on the far left of the line, moving along the Knighttown Road, today known as St. Andrews Road, northward, being the far left line. The Confederates weren't too worried about their right flank because you had the Potomac River bending in, creating that border. And same thing for the Federals. They weren't too worried about their left flank because the Potomac River was there. Both sides, specifically the Confederates, as I'm describing, were worried about, and they just wanted to be more cautious with their left flank. So Jackson will send Stuart around the western side of their line, out a couple miles or a mile or so away from the west of the Valley Pike, northward. On the Federals' perspective, just maybe a mile or two after Patterson's men are, a good bit across the Potomac River, the elements of the 15th Pennsylvania as well as the 14th and 24th Pennsylvania will be sent off to the far right of their line, watching to see that their flank is secure. And they'll be sent on some various back roads, and specifically leading the front will be of that Federal detachment will be Company I of the 15th Pennsylvania. Moving down that road, the same road practically that Stuart is coming up, what separates the road in the middle is the Hammond's Mill Road, this one I referred to earlier, running east to west straight into the Valley Pike. And at this intersection of this road where Confederates are coming from south to north, St. Andrews Road, and the Federals are coming north to south, right at the intersection of that with Hammond's Mill Road is a low ground with rises at the intersection and around it. This low ground gets the name Stumpy's Hollow. And this low ground, once you're there, you really are blind to the main battle taking place along the Valley Pike. And as it begins, these troops over here have no idea what's going on once they arrive to this area. You can probably only hear the exchange of musketry and cannon, but visually watching the battle and seeing the engagement take place, you're in the dark. Who will arrive here first to Stumpy's Hollow? Well, that'll be Company I of the 15th Pennsylvania. They will almost get sort of sidetracked as they're moving down this road, leading the way for the rest of the Federals. And at some point, they'll reach Stumpy's Hollow early in the morning of July 2nd, and they'll decide to take a break. So there's a nice, there's this junction of the roads here. There's tree cover. There's some fencing. And so they're like, all right, let's break it down for a second. Let's put our guns, stack our guns up, and just take a rest. Meanwhile, the battle closer to the pike, the action there is really not underway completely yet. And as they're there, Stuart will arrive from the south. And Stuart, from a distance, seeing these Federals posted up, Stuart will ride down to the fence, ask two Federal soldiers, to move some fencing so he can pass through. And once he enters, he will tell everyone to lay down their arms or stand up and be captured. And this is because Stuart's still wearing a blue uniform. So this is where we always talk about at Manassas, the confusion of of uniforms and flags during battle. But Stuart wearing his blue uniform will, as the gate in the fence per se is opened, Stuart will enter, be like, thanks. And then he'll be like, all right, everybody, you're mine now. And just as this is happening, there's other elements of Stuart's men, because you got to think the Company I of the 15th Pennsylvania is not all in one big circle. Mm-hmm. They're spread out over a good area. So Stuart thought about this before he went down there and provoked this, capture. He'll send some of his men off to the west of the road, along the Hammonds Mill Road as it moves westward, to come in from that side, so west to east. And he'll come in from south to north. And this will kind of happen simultaneously. There's a lot of disputed accounts. We know Stuart will capture, combined with the 1st Virginia, they'll capture 50-something men here. So he's, surrender. The quote escapes my mind, but it was something like, surrender, you belong to Jeff Davis. Oh, here we go. Surrender, you damned Yankees. Surrender to Jeff Davis. And then, there was confusion as these Confederates just appeared and started rounding up Federals. But there's a point during this engagement here at Stumpy's Hollow. We're on the far western side of the battlefield at this point. The main fighting is taking place about a mile east of here. It's debated, but what we know is supposedly Stuart we don't know if he's free or he's enslaved, but there is a armed African American among Stuart's ranks. And he's present there, and supposedly he fires a shot during the engagement. In the reports later, it says, he shot down a man or he killed a man. So it gets a little misconstrued. But what we do know is for certain, at this specific engagement, the 1st Virginia Cavalry and the elements that are present with Stuart at Stumpy's Hollow, there is an armed African American, freed or not freed. We don't know if he's a servant for one of the, leadership within the 1st, or if he's an enlisted man.
But he's carrying a weapon with him.
But yeah, he is carrying a weapon.
Wow, I didn't even know that.
So that happens here. And after this is really what will wrap up the, Stuart's men, as the rest of those Federals that were following behind Company I of the 15th Pennsylvania will start to approach. Stuart gets his prisoners from there, and he'll skedaddle out. He knows he's no longer needed in this area. The rest of the Federals will begin coming down this road as well, pursuing slowly. Mm-hmm. Well, back to the main battle itself, along the Valley Pike, you'll have elements of the 1st Wisconsin as well as the 11th Pennsylvania coming to the field right away, and you'll have cavalry troops under the Philadelphia City Troopers coming in, the 2nd U.S. Cavalry coming in. So you've got some interesting names to regiments you normally don't hear about.
Typical early war stuff.
Exactly. But Hudson has 2 guns, Federal guns, positioned on a rise to the west of the Valley Pike, overlooking sort of this bowl around the Porterfield farm. And this is the farm I mentioned earlier that companies C, D, and H of the 5th Virginia will be drawn to and positioned to. And at the same time that's happening, Federal skirmishers are in this area. So they almost arrive at the same time to this Porterfield farm. The Federals ultimately are drawn back to the main Federal line. And the company C, D, and H of the 5th Virginia will take kind of shelter, per se, or a position within the farm, the Porterfield farm, in the buildings of the main house, the barn from the house across the Valley Pike, and other farming structures. Mm-hmm. It's determined here that this will kind of be the focus of the battle, the Porterfield farm itself. And that's down in this low ground. You've got the 1-gun Luke of the Rockbridge Artillery positioned on a rise to the south of it, in line with other companies of the 5th Virginia. But kind of in advance is the Porterfield farm, but it's in a low area. And this will draw the fire of Hudson's 2 Federal guns, and they'll begin focusing that fire upon the Porterfield farm. And the Confederate gun, for now, Luke, is silent at this point, not having drawn fire to it and not producing any damage to the Federals. So as Hudson's 2 Federal guns are drawn to the Porterfield farm because they see the Confederates posted up in there, they'll begin firing upon it. And as a result, you'll have major damage done to the Porterfield house. You'll have incredible damage done to the Porterfield barn, which will ultimately burn as a result of the Federal artillery fire. And at that point, the Confederates kind of need to pull out of that area and join the main Confederate force. And this is when you'll have the 1st Wisconsin. So this is, the 1st Wisconsin Infantry. You don't really hear a lot of the 1st when it comes to Wisconsin. And in the 1st Wisconsin Infantry, you'll have Private, I believe he's a Private, George C. Drake, and he will be the first casualty of Wisconsin from the state of Wisconsin during the American Civil War, and it'll be right here at Hokes Run. The interesting thing about the Wisconsins during this battle is that they're still in a lot of militia uniforms, and they're wearing gray uniforms. Yeah. Everything else is Federal, the belt, the everything else except for their uniforms are gray, and this will start to cause confusion amongst the battlefield, along the battlefield. The 1st Wisconsin will come in and perform attack, and there's great accounts of the Confederates witnessing this. This is battle. This is the first, specifically in the Valley, if not during the war at this point, the first full use of troops and troop movements deploying in large lines of battle. The Confederates give really good accounts of witnessing these Federals in long lines of battle with the colors waving in the air and everything, all the brass and accoutrements shining, glistening in the sun. This will be kind of the first time you see that, and the Confederates see it, and they're taken aback by it because it's like, whoa, this is war.
Right.
And to mention with all these first I'm mentioning, with Stuart kind of being offset, this is almost one of the first times, if not the first, you'll see cavalry used in an independent way during battle. Most of the time you have supporting. We talked about this, I think, during the Brandy Station episode.
Yeah.
But right here in July of 1861, you have Confederates using, specifically Jackson using Stuart as an independent force to assist with the momentum of battle. And that'll be an interesting thing you see here. Like I said, this is a really short battle. You have the 11th Pennsylvania that's going to come around the western side of the battlefield, where modern day 81 is, and attempt to perform a kind of a flanking attack on the far left Confederate line. This is, those 5th Virginia men along Hammond's Mill Road. But by that point, the Confederates will begin to pull back. This artillery fire from the Federals is overwhelming. The Rockbridge artillery, the 6-pounder, will be able to get about 8 shots off during this time. Nice. As Federals are coming out of the wood line and they're aiming right at troops coming right out of the Valley Pike, they'll just be able to aim accurately. I think there's an account from Pendleton that says right before they fire their first shot, they say, aim low and may God forgive them, or something. It's something that's just whoa. Yeah. And they were accurate. Those shots were accurate by the Confederates. But ultimately, as more Federals are arriving to the field and being plugged in, this is when you'll see George Thomas's command enter the field. George H. Thomas, and you'll have the 6th Pennsylvania, the 23rd Pennsylvania, the 21st Pennsylvania. They'll begin to come and be deployed east of the Pike to attack the far right line of the Confederates. And this is when Jackson will understand, okay, I have just one regiment here, a couple hundred, if not 1,000 guys. I've got cavalry that's moving around. And meanwhile, I've got regiments upon regiments, so thousands and thousands of men getting ready to come onto the battlefield and attack. So Jackson knows I have to pull back strategically and collect my troops and fall back. This is not where we're going to get eaten up. Yeah. And using cavalry to his advantage, he'll set up screens to allow for these troops to pull out. And the terrain will play an important factor here. Like I said, the Porterfield farm being down in a barn, and where the Hammonds Mill Road comes into the Valley Pike, kind of being on a rise. This is where the Confederates are positioned. Well, south of them in their line of retreat is more ravines and cutouts of the terrain, so they're able to fall back and kind of slip away. So like I said, you have this 11th Pennsylvania movement on the far western side of the battlefield coming to do a flank. By the time they arrive, Harper's 5th Virginia has already pulled out. And as they begin to pull out and move south along the pike, up the Valley Pike, they'll set up more defensive positions, but Patterson is slow to move in pursuing. This strategic fallback, set up a defensive line, will give Jackson time to gather all of his, supplies and troops that are still at Camp Stevens and move them south. And as they'll move them to Martinsburg, and then from there drop back to Bunker Hill. Well, they'll form another defensive line at Bunker Hill with more Confederate troops that he has, bringing troops up from Winchester with Johnston. Johnston's notified of this, and be prepared for another attack from Patterson, but that attack never comes. Patterson reportedly held a council of war wanting to attack, but all of his officers under him that were involved with this council of war opted out of it. They did not want to attack, but Patterson was still slow to pursue. Ultimately, Jackson, Stewart, Johnson, will kind of get praised for this, even though on paper it seems like it's a 30-minute battle. Action. So this is like a 30-minute, half-hour battle. They'll get praised for this because it was strategic. The Federals were going to cross at some point. Patterson's objective was to keep Jackson in the valley. And this Jackson slowly moving back and gathering with the rest of his men ultimately was able to pull out of the valley and join with other Confederate forces at Manassas Junction. As a result, Patterson, like I said, slowly will pursue, arriving and then ultimately finding out there's no Confederates here in the Shenandoah Valley. Patterson will set up headquarters in Martinsburg. And after the Battle of Manassas, no one's really batting an eye at Patterson until Manassas, until Bull Run. And once that happens and it's a Confederate victory, there will begin an investigation on why did this happen? How did we lose this battle? And kind of fingers all start pointing to Patterson because he allowed Jackson to slip away out of the valley where he was contained for a period of time.
So they're just going to pin that all on him.
So they pinned it on Patterson.
That's crazy. Patterson,
because his enlistment ran like the rest of these Federal soldiers, 3 months. By the time after Manassas, his term will expire, and he'll be honorably discharged. And he'll spend a good bit of the remainder of his life. He even writes a book, during the war about the Shenandoah campaign of 1861. He'll spend a good bit of the remainder of his life trying to explain why he did what he did and how it's not his fault. Very Milroy-esque in a way, if you think about it.
But honestly, in my opinion, that's not his fault.
Yeah.
Because, it's his subordinates that are the ones telling him this isn't a good idea to pursue. And then he ends up catching all the heat for it. Meanwhile, they go on to become, like Thomas. These folks are taking their claim to fame in history. And then the rest of that just kind of falls on him. Yeah,
Thomas's men, like you mentioned, he's present. I read a lot of those names like Alpheus Williams, Dixon Miles, Abercrombie will be here, but Charles P. Stone, Dan Butterfield, not all of those guys are engaged, but George E. Thomas is here, and he'll deploy with his men onto the battlefield. They'll advance, but they're not going to engage anybody.
Right.
The Confederates are already in retreat by this point, but this is his first battle. They're in it. They are there.
Feet wet, yeah.
And he'll go on to do great things. You don't hear much out of Abercrombie after the war. Patterson, like we talked about. But the Rockbridge Artillery, the 5th Virginia, Stewart, Jackson, they'll leave their names in the history books. But this was, this action right here kind of set up what was to be in the valley. You have the invasion. You have, the use of the terrain here. You have the overall strategic objective of keeping someone pinned in the valley, but the valley being so close to other key strategic areas like Northern Virginia, just over the mountain. So if you can't keep someone pinned and they can slide out, how does that affect? So this was a learning experience I think definitely for Jackson, if not the Confederates. I think the Federals could have learned a lot more from this battle, but it'll take them another year after and another whooping from Jackson in 1862 to really get an understanding of how the Valley can be used for the benefit of the Union Army.
Right. I think it's interesting, too, that for at least the casual student of the Civil War, everyone thinks that Manassas is like the first action, and that's not the case. We've got stuff happening, here at Hokes Run and other smaller movements.
Yeah, you've got
prior to
Philippi in Western Virginia today, West Virginia. I think is it Big Bethel? I think that's
Big Bethel down pretty much Suffolk today, I guess. But that's where the Bethel Regiment gets their name. Company B of the 1st North Carolina. But there's some other...
Yeah, June 10th, that'll take place. And then you'll have some Western theater battles. I think it's like Boonesville, Missouri. There's a lot of stuff taking place before Manassas. I mean, realistically, in the grand scheme of things, you'd call this a skirmish because of how quick it is. And but it's,
It's just got a lot of moving parts to it.
Yeah, it's quick. It's small numbers, but... it's like a scrimmage. It's like the build up before a big game.
Yeah.
How are you gonna play the cards? And I think Jackson does it in an interesting way. He had the troops, I feel like, to win the day, but
he's not showing his full playbook.
Exactly. He's got so many more troops behind him. Patterson's taking almost all of his force, thousands, if not 10,000 plus men, moving them across the Potomac River in one spot and just
kind of throw everything he's got in a small
he's just
force.
moving. He's moving, and nothing's really strategic. I mean, in this battle, like I said, using the terrain, they both sides, like I said, have the Potomac River on their east.
So they've got an even playing field as far as
even playing
boundaries.
field. Jackson sends Stuart to their left flank. Patterson, as soon as they cross a couple miles south of the river, will send Pennsylvanians off to their right to make sure that they're secure on that side.
They just let Stuart in. They made the mistake.
Exactly. Yeah. And that account is crazy. I feel like and it's really debated amongst local historians. I feel like now, but there's accounts where Stuart just walked in there all by himself and captured all 80 men or something.
Yeah.
And there's accounts where, it wasn't Stuart, it was somebody else, or it was Stuart and another guy, or it was, a bunch of Federals got shot, and I don't think there was any recorded casualties from the Federals, specifically those Pennsylvanians right there at Stumpy's Hollow with Stuart. So which leads me to believe it was pretty quick cleanup by the Confederates just saying, you're ours.
It would make the most sense if it were Stuart and some of his staff who still wore blue. That would make the most sense as to it being, an official capture, by an opposing staff.
I don't, and I think in some Pennsylvanians' accounts that were here, it's what's interesting too is some of these Pennsylvanians, I think all of them that are captured, will be held in prisons and won't be released, the ones that survive, until like May of 1862. So they will spend a
while, yeah.
Yeah, so from July
almost
2nd.
A whole year.
Yeah, almost a whole year they'll be in prison. But there's good accounts of Stuart doing what he said, asking the fence to be taken down so he could enter. He's wearing a blue uniform. And then that quote of, surrendered to Jeff Davis.
Right.
But he does send, it's more of a strategic capture, knowing these guys are in a low area here. You can't be seen. It's pretty impressive, I think. It's very bold.
And it's probably one of those things where he's got the rest of his command behind him, and he's like, okay, wait a couple minutes, but then come in as I'm here.
Yeah,
in case things go south.
You've got tree cover, you've got open field, you're able to see your enemy there. And this isn't all of the 1st Virginia. Remember, Stuart has a front along the Potomac 50 miles long. So you have some of these guys 50 miles away, let's say.
Yeah.
So this is just portions of the 1st Virginia Cavalry that are here. So that's how you're able to use small...
Pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, that's how it's interesting to see how these battles can be fought with such small numbers. Mm-hmm. And then you fast forward to like 1864, and you've got 40,000 men versus a bunch of other men. It's crazy.
The development of war.
Yeah. So a little bit about the battlefield today. I think it's like exit 901. Well, I don't think the exit number is 901, but it's exit 2901 on I-81 in Martinsburg. It's the second exit as you come in from Maryland, and it's like the fourth or fifth one if you enter from Virginia. But it's the exit up from the last Martinsburg exit, if that helps you with anything. 901 today is modern-day Hammonds Mill Road. It'll keep going straight once it reaches the Valley Pike to take you to a school complex for Berkeley County, but Campus Drive, that extension of 901, was not there. Like I said, it teed. Most of this area has been developed. The Porterfield House stood a couple years ago and sadly was taken down and removed for future development of a strip mall and a neighborhood. The Porterfield Barn obviously was burned during the battle, so these major landmarks don't exist. The flow of Route 11 still is there. The terrain in which this development has sprawled in this area of Berkeley County lays on top of the same terrain that the soldiers experienced in July of 1861. So it's not impossible to get a feeling for what the battlefield would have looked like and did look like. Mm-hmm. You can go to a couple of these sites that have wayside interpretive signage, like the United Bank off of Route 11, as well as the Sheets. They have some interpretive signs in there, as well out as at Stumpy's Hollow. There's actually an active preservation group there that's small but mighty, and that is the Falling Waters. See, here's the other name for the battle. The Falling Waters Battlefield Association Incorporated, I believe. And that is ran by a great historian that I believe founded the initiative, and that's Gary Gimble. And Gary's a great guy. Super knowledgeable. He has spent the past 30 years researching, writing, talking, trying to preserve as much as he can related to the Battle of Falling Waters, or also known as Hokes Run. And he's done a great job. And they've actually preserved a little bit of ground at Stumpy's Hollow. It's like 0.2 acres, but there's a pull-off there. There's an interpretive sign. There's a historic fencing. So that's there at Stumpy's Hollow. And like I said, there's interpretive signage throughout this area along the Valley Pike, even up at the village of Falling Waters, where the waterfall is, where the Valley Pike ran through, where Patterson's men came through. There's some interpretive signage there that talks about the beginning of the battle, as well as that was the point in 1863 where the Confederates crossed back over. And then there's actually a monument on the battlefield. It's called the Stonewall Jackson Monument, even though he wasn't labeled Stonewall then. It's the Stonewall Jackson Monument. It's on the east side of the Valley Turnpike. Like I said, and like a lot of stuff around here, surrounded by development. The monument reads, "In memory of General Stonewall Jackson." This tablet is erected by the Berkeley County Chapter United Daughters of the Confederacy to commemorate an instance of General Jackson's remarkable bravery at all times in the face of gravest danger. On this site where the monument stands, on July 2nd, 1861, General Jackson, which he was colonel at this point, was seated under an oak tree, giving orders when fired upon by Federal troops. A cannonball cut off a limb of a tree, but Jackson, unhurt, rode calmly away. A little bit about the monument with some tiny inaccuracies there. I don't think Jackson specifically was fired upon. I mentioned that the Confederate gun Luke, the 6-pounder, was very accurate. The Federal guns were kind of getting honed in at that point. As they begin firing at the early stages of the battle, there's a lot of overshoot from the Federals, and it's believed to be some of this overshot is goes over about, it's accounted by one Confederate 100 yards over my head. You could see glistening in the sun, a round shoots over us. So they're a little bit inaccurate at the beginning.
Just a little.
But to give you an idea, if that kept going based off where Jackson is viewing this battle a little bit south of the main Confederate line along the Hammonds Mill Road and Valley Pike, maybe some of this overshot was what hit a tree that fell on, near Jackson. So there is a monument on the battlefield, and just recently, so if whenever this episode gets posted, actually the day that we were recording it, it's announced that the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields Foundation is partnering with Berkeley County and Berkeley County's commission to preserve 10 acres at Stumpy's Hollow. So nice. Where Stewart moves through and captures these men under the 15th Pennsylvania, there's more land next to the land that's already preserved by the Falling Waters Battlefield Association, and there's an opportunity to create a portion of what can grow to be the Hokes Run Battlefield Park. So that's an exciting announcement that you listeners get to hear pretty soon after it was announced. So there will soon be a Hokes Run Battlefield Park in Berkeley County that visitors from wherever and locals can experience, walk trails, read interpretive signage here in the future. But we have to save the land first, and that's our first goal. So even though this area is highly developed, there's still a possibility. And like I just said with this example, there is possibilities to save more land here. But this small little battle, the Battle of Hokes Run, the battle with many names, often gets forgotten. It's a blimp in the radar of Civil War engagements here in the Shenandoah Valley, specifically Civil War battles fought during the war. But we hope as it sets the scene for major players in the American Civil War that it doesn't get forgotten. It's a good learning experience for both sides, and it is often forgotten, but I feel like for these men here, I mean, like I said, there's a lot of first engagements for a lot of these commanders. The first soldier, like I said, from Wisconsin killed during the Civil War is killed here at Hokes Run. The first invasion into the Shenandoah Valley is here and leads to the Battle of Hokes Run. The first soldier from Pennsylvania killed during the American Civil War, I believe, is killed here at Hokes Run. So a good bit of first here with the Battle of Hokes Run. And the podcast actually went longer than the battle took place. So that's another interesting fact as well.
In the amount of time it took us to record this, it has happened. It came and went.
Yeah, and this is an early morning fight. Like I said, Patterson's men cross. They're probably engaging right around 7, 8 o'clock in the morning as they get closer to where the main battlefield is. But it's around, 7:30. Stewart's men are alerted by the pickets closer to Jackson's headquarters. So around 9:30 is when this engagement specifically around the Valley Pike will take place.
It's crazy that it's even able to take 30 minutes for a battle like that, because everybody's moving on foot or by horse, and to be able to move into position and to really even make anything happen all in a matter of 30 minutes is kind of crazy, because like you'd think that would take at least an hour and a half, 2 hours to really unfold and get everybody into position to really make something noteworthy happen. But I mean, that's pretty cool to see that it was only a quick little in and out.
Troop movements the 5th Virginia have the advantage of being one regiment positioning pretty close together in 3 different sects. But like I mentioned, you have all these other federal regiments arriving to the field, deploying, advancing, and the Confederates are gone by then. So they kind of played it safe, because you had, all of Thomas's command about to slam the right flank of the Confederates, and the 11th Pennsylvania coming around to swing the left flank. So they got out of there in good order, and there's only a handful of casualties. I think the reports say, I think it was 23 federal casualties. A handful of those are just killed. I think it's like 3 or 4 killed. And then it's like 3 or 4 for the Confederates, 91 casualties total. So it's you'll have about 4,000 Confederates available in that immediate area, but only
engaged is probably significantly less.
Engaged is significantly less. And same with, you had 2 brigades under Patterson present, but actually engaged would be a little bit less as well. So, that's the Battle of Hokes Run. Quick and easy.
Quick and easy.
Yeah, with our Elijah Craig toasted barrel. I love it. This was good to sip on.
Also goes down quick and easy.
Quick and easy, just like the Battle of Hokes Run. Well, if you enjoyed listening to this episode, please, like I said, and you want to support the podcast, consider becoming a member of the Battlefields Foundation. The Battlefields Foundation is at www.shenandoahatwar.org, and you can go on there and find ways to support. Membership is the best way because members receive benefits, discounts at events, magazines, calendars, as well as our newsletters, things like that.
You even get a membership card.
You get a membership card, which gets you admissions into the battlefield parks as well as some of our museums. And you can also just stay in the loop if you want to know more about Hokes Run and our preservation efforts there, as well as every other area we're working at in the Shenandoah Valley. Members are the first to know. And they're our biggest supporters when it comes to those projects. We're not able to begin them without members. So, by becoming a member of the Battlefields Foundation, like I said at the beginning, in turn, it does support the Battlefields and Bourbon podcast. And if you enjoyed listening to this episode specifically, and this is your first time listening, or you just listened a second time and you're still loving it, please give it 5 stars. Share with your friends, share on social media, and reach out to us if you have any questions or ideas or suggestions for future episode topics. Our next episode will be our 1-year episode, so it'll be a little different but exciting. And we're excited for the future of the podcast. And thank you so much for listening today, folks.
Thanks.